What is personality? Can you put people in a box? Was Jung correct with his observations? These and a lot more questions connected to the Myers-Briggs have been floating around in my head for a few months now, but I never really did any research to try and answer these questions. I've been familiar with MBTI for a while now, but only in the past year have I looked at it more in depth, outside of my own type description. The more knowledge I gained, the more I started to question the validity of this personality system. And so I'm setting out on a small journey to find out what the experts and critics say, or even what the community thinks of the validity and use of this tool. Nevertheless, MBTI. If you want a short answer to the question, do we need it? Kinda yeah. There's a question mark at the end because, as always, nothing's as simple as it initially seems. And you'll probably understand once I get into the 8 reasons why we could use it. I will be giving some criticism, so keep an open mind. A little side note, if you're watching this, I'm making the assumption that you know a little bit more than the simple type descriptions that everyone knows. So if you don't know what the 8 cognitive functions are, do a quick Google search, otherwise you might not understand everything I'll be talking about later. Anyway, so first of all, it helps us define a stable set of characteristics. MBTI is based off of Jung's work, where he observes 4 dichotomies as our base characteristics. But can you prove that these dichotomies actually exist? Are these 8 cognitive functions found in people outside of observation and inference? Is MBTI the only way to explain our biological predispositions? Well, a lot of people criticize MBTI by comparing it to the 5-factor model, which is largely accepted by the scientific community because of its validity and predictive capabilities. But I wouldn't try to compare the two to the same degree, because MBTI is attempting a deeper and more holistic approach to personality, even though mostly everyone admits that it can't do that and is actually not meant for that. And although it's supposedly trying to describe personality, it's hard to distinguish it from traits, which the Big Five is describing. Because if you know the definitions, and you kinda know both systems, it can be a little hard to distinguish the two, even if both systems aren't really correlated. But okay, can you prove MBTI? The good news are that Dario has shown that it's possible to map out each function in the brain's neocortex, which means there is some basis in our biology. So different types will have different brain activities in different parts of the brain. The problem is, even he admits that rarely any 2 people in a single type have near identical EEG brain scans, to the point where an INFP might even resemble an ENTJ in some brain scans. And this is obviously because there's more to personality than only these 8 functions. It even shows that sensors are more diverse amongst themselves than intuitives, where ironically, ENFPs are the most alike. That's because sensors usually specialize more. It might sound counterintuitive, but if you think about it, sensing is a function which is geared towards gaining new information in a raw way without much processing, whereas intuition is a built-in mechanism to find patterns. And it's not that easy to learn a new way how to connect information, if you can at all. Now this ties into the second reason why we could need it. Even though the EEG scans show that there are personality clusters within this framework, it doesn't show the full picture, which we can observe by the diversity in a single type. Each function could be broken down even further, or we just need to add other factors into this model. But this doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Understanding MBTI is like putting on glasses. It doesn't show you the full reality of this world, but it sure as hell helps. For example, to understand why you and your parents don't get along so well. It definitely doesn't show the full story, but it helps to understand why rarely any 2 people think the same way. And this ties in perfectly with the 3rd and 4th point. It's especially useful for jobs that require communication with people. I think almost anything in the medical field could use the framework of some people need hard logic and facts to believe in a treatment. For some, you need to speak to their values. Some people might not like the physical activity their physical therapist might be recommending to them. It just generally helps you to understand why it's harder to communicate with some people. For example, for me, an INFJ, it's a lot harder to communicate with an ISTP, because a person like that might not really see the need for abstract concepts in their lives, which is almost the core of my being. And so this understanding can diffuse unnecessary conflicts and anger for seemingly no reason. The self-awareness part is definitely underrated by the scientific community, because without it, there can't really be the real reason why Jung created this framework. It helps you understand why you have a tendency to conform to social standards, whereas some of your friends are always doing their own thing. It definitely helped me understand why I'm not just crazy for wanting to dig so deep into things, and that having self-destructive thoughts is actually normal for some. Having the knowledge of why I'm predisposed to certain thoughts and actions helped me and a lot of people to grow out of their unhealthy behaviors that are associated with certain functions. Now, there is the problem of people wanting to place their identity in their type, and almost religiously believing that they have to fit into every stereotype, of the type. Unfortunately, I don't think it's the tool's fault as much as our society's, because it hasn't given us the framework to find our identity. But it probably would be helpful if it came with a warning sign that this could happen. It's really tempting to try and find your identity in general statements of a group of people that you seem to belong to, especially if you felt misunderstood your whole life. So the fifth point in what the framework was originally designed for is growth. This typology doesn't show as much who you are, but what you're predisposed to. And why is this important? In short, you don't build a skyscraper on the foundations of a factory. Well, you can, but it's just not going to be as effective, and it can have devastating effects. We're the same. We have certain built-in structures, which say that certain parts of our brain work more efficiently from birth. I'm a perfect example. As an INFJ, I've never really liked extroverted sensing activities. But I guess unfortunately, I've been physically gifted with explosive power, so my parents made me do sports. I'm decent at them, but it took a lot of work to actually get it to feel natural, to a degree. But it did help me to not be afraid of doing things well in the real world, whereas sensors are just naturally good at picking up these things. And now the self-awareness that MBTI has given me helps me understand why I'm so good at thinking about abstract concepts, but suck at everything and anything practical. It helped me understand what I've improved, what are my strengths, and what still needs my attention, so I can die as self-actualized as I can. It doesn't say what you strictly should be, but it gives a framework in which your type can better self-actualize. Although, let's be honest, that's not how it's usually represented, especially given all the unofficial tests that there are online, which only give us a simple type description. Now, this one is debatable. A lot of scientists want MBTI to be on the same level as the Big Five, but it wasn't meant to predict somebody's success in life. There have been attempts to show that it does, and there have been attempts to try and link the two systems together, but the results are mixed at best. There are still things it can't predict though. Certain disorders are more prevalent in certain types, like extroverted intuition DOMs are more likely to have ADHD. If I'm not mistaken, IPs are more likely to be suicidal and attempt suicide. It's more likely than chance that your kids will be the same type as you or the complete opposite. There are other things, but not nearly as many as the Big Five has. And one big criticism for MBTI is that it's useless. It might not predict your income, but saying that it's useless is intellectually lazy and dishonest. As I've mentioned, it's a tool for growth. It wasn't meant to diagnose anything. And they say this only knowing the type descriptions. But as I see it, life coaching isn't really that bad of a thing, although it can be. But they do have a point, because up front, it looks like a tool for entertainment, because the most popular tests online don't give a description of the functions. Now this one is really slippery, because MBTI doesn't account for every difference in each type, assigning a specific job to a certain type doesn't account for their individual skill, experience, mental abilities, interests, environment, family history, etc. If an ENFP spent their whole life working in an office with a computer, it's much less likely that they'll be the creative motivator that an INTJ could be by being an art team's director. So even if your type is more likely to have certain traits, it's still a lot better to account for individual differences, because we don't know how far the type can go. Last and probably the least is that you can have a sense of community. There can be the problem of identity with this as well, but if done correctly, you can have people in your life that truly understand you. It might be a lot easier to find people who you'd get along with, as long as you don't sort people. I'm looking at you, intuitives. I think I covered most reasons why we need it, but to summarize, it's a good tool and a good starting point, but not the whole picture. It's a part of the picture that we only recently found to be true. And so a lot of people haven't checked the new data and think it's a load of baloney. But to be fair, the results are in a sense still mixed. We still don't know how the rest of the body affects our personality, our sex, career, midlife, experiences, or even the other parts of the brain. There are so many more factors to take into consideration, which the MBTI doesn't. But there is still something to it. It's not unscientific, but it's still in its infancy stages. And lastly, to answer if it's putting people into boxes, in a sense, yes, but if used correctly, no. Because it can help you grow out of the boxes by showing your weaknesses. It might not show the full picture, but theoretically, it should be possible to categorize people completely. It would probably be 100,000 types though. So I'll leave you with this. Find out what your type is, and use it to become something more than just another white sheep. Thanks for watching.